We're talking about Texas Tech versus Kansas State. And speaking of these two teams, we just talked about the Oklahoma game. Both these teams are coming off some pretty big wins. Now, who can capitalize on another big win and who has a hangover from the win the week before? Both these teams are 3-1, both on a win streak of just one after the wins from last week. Obviously, Texas Tech wins in a comeback fashion against the Longhorns in overtime, and Kansas State wins against the Sooners 41-34. I think this game's going to be exciting. You hear the Texas Tech coach last week talk about how the college football goes through Lubbock. Well, they're playing Kansas State this week, but he's got his team fired up. He's got his team ready to roll. And I would not think any different against Kansas State. Kansas State has had Oklahoma's number. They did lose the week before against Tulane. So is Kansas State one of those teams that can just turn it on against their rivals and not anyone else? This is going to be a Big 12 matchup that could define some placements of maybe Big 12 championship future. I'm interested in this one, though. This is a really good game to watch. What's your thoughts on
it? It's going to be a must game for Kansas State. Not that I think that they're going to lose. They need to come out and make a statement. Coming off the Oklahoma game, and this just in, as we talked about, Oklahoma is a very good football team. Mm-hmm. They had their way. Adrian Martinez doesn't have to throw bombs and throw the ball downfield. He can if he had to, but he's a good game manager, and he's more dangerous with his legs than he is with his arm. I think Kansas State, personally, I think they're a top 20 team now, even though they're not in the rankings. I mean, I think they've shown that even with the kind of stumble that they had, with the one game, they're a complete football team. And you don't often talk about defenses in the Big 12. I've always thought it should be flag football when you're playing in the Big 12, because nobody really plays defense. And hopefully maybe you grab, that flag before he gets too far past you. But Kansas State can dictate the tempo of a game with their defense. They can control, the clock on offense. Texas Tech showed me a lot against Texas. They showed me a lot, but I think Kansas State, they want to come out and say, okay, stop overlooking us. Okay, stop confusing our logo with the Hawkeye logo. We're purple, they're blue and yellow. It's a must win, and it's a must decisive win, I think, for Kansas State.
Yeah, I believe you. I think that's definitely the case. I think that Kansas State needs this win more than Texas Tech does. I think that's definitely what needs to happen. Texas Tech's loss was to a very tough NC State team. Kansas State lost to Tulane. And I think that if Kansas State really wants to make a name for themselves in the Big 12, this is where you do it. After beating Oklahoma, you go beat Texas Tech. I think it runs through two ways. And this is how, and they both, to me, point back to the quarterback. I know that we talk about quarterbacks a lot on this show, but I mean, come on, if you pay attention to college sports, or you pay attention to football at all, the majority of the storylines about quarterbacks because they just run the game, right? Donovan Smith for Texas Tech, he's had a pretty great year so far. But as you can see, I put on the graphic, can he protect the football? Because other than their win versus Houston, where he threw interceptions, in their loss against NC State, he threw 3 picks. And he threw 2 picks against Houston. That's where his 5 interceptions came from. He didn't throw an interception last week against Texas. In their comeback win, he threw for over 331 yards against those Longhorns. If he can protect the football, Texas Tech has a really good spot of winning this football. And then before I give it back to you, I'm going to shift over to my second thought, and it goes to the next one. Adrian Martinez, you already brought him up, but he is one of the best transfers this season in all of college football in my mind. I think he is. And if you look at his season stats, it's nothing really impressive through the air. He's only thrown 500 and some odd yards and 2 touchdowns, but he is the dual threat quarterback in college football right now. Last week, he threw for almost 250 against Oklahoma, but he ran for almost 150 on the ground. I think it was 148. If Texas Tech can find a way to stop and contain Adrian Martinez on the run and the rest of the running squad of Kansas State Wildcats, Texas Tech, the Red Raiders, have a really good spot, a really good chance of winning this football game. If they cannot contain him, good luck.
The biggest decision that Texas Tech's coaching staff has to make is Are we going to focus on shutting down Adrian Martinez on the run and let Deuce Vaughn run all over the field? Another very underrated back, one of the best backs in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Or do we want to shut down Deuce Vaughn and say, okay, maybe you get hurt on a run. That's probably with running quarterbacks, you get banged up. Maybe you're not going out of the game, but maybe your ribs are a little sore, your shoulders a little sore because you fall wrong. So I mean, is that the way they go? That and they can't have it both ways. They're not going to shut both of them down. They're going to have to really zero in on one of them. And perhaps if they're shutting down Vaughn, maybe it's forcing Martinez to beat them with the pass and not just with his legs. So that'll be a really interesting in-game thing to look at, especially in the first half. How is Texas Tech approaching it defensively? Do they want to contain Martinez? Do they want to contain Vaughn?
When you look at this matchup so far, and if you remember from the stats, Texas Tech is doing pretty well against the run so far this year. I think they are just at the 100-yard mark per game. That's going to go up this week, regardless. Based on exactly what you said, I agree with you 100%. There might be an opportunity where they can't stop either of them, and I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. Looking at this line, Texas Tech is a 7.5-point underdog to Kansas State. The over-under is 57.5. Kansas State is predicted by ESPN Matchup Predictor to win 68.8%. I'm taking Kansas State here at -7.5. I think they can win this game by more than a touchdown. With that 57, I think for the over-under, I'm going to slam the under on that one. I think that even though I think that Kansas State can win this football game, I think a lot of it will be through the run. So I think that the clock will go pretty quick. I think this will be a time possession game that is controlled by Kansas State later in the game, and it won't get that high. So I'm going to go Kansas State -7.5, and I'm going to slam the under.
I am going to go Kansas State -7.5, but I'm going to hit the over. Vaughn is a big game, big play back. So potentially he could break one or two if they're focusing on trying to shut Martinez down, and that's going to give Kansas State a chance to maybe pad the score a little bit. They're not going to go way over. I would probably be sweating if I bet this on the over as we get in the last 4 or 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. I'm like, but I really do think Kansas State is going to come out guns a-blazing, and that's why I want to go with the over on that, because either Martinez is going to beat him on the ground or Vaughn is, no matter how good Texas Tech, and they have been, as you pointed out earlier, terrific as far as defending the run. They haven't faced a dual tandem running like Martinez and Vaughn, so I'm going to go the over.
Gotcha. All right. So again, we're a little bit different here. I know we picked the same in games 2 and 3 and kind of in 4 too. At least we still have Michigan and Iowa to be split on. At least we're not 5 for 5 like we were last week. Who knows?